Joining us now to talk more about that free trade agreement with Ukraine is the country's ambassador to Canada, Yulia Kovaliv. Ambassador, good pleasure to have you back here in studio. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Vassy.
I want to start off on what is kind of politically contentious here domestically, and that is the degree to which this agreement involves a carbon tax or a price on carbon. Can you explain from your perspective, does this impose any kind of carbon tax on Ukraine?
Thank you, Vassy. And first of all, I would like to say that each country decides. There are many options, and many countries have different policies on how to deal with the climate change. And globally, both in Europe, North America, and the other parts of the world, there are different instruments which have been used to deal with the climate change and to support business to make more transformation on that. And what's important for Ukraine with this free trade agreement, I think the best example is yesterday and the day before, we had a big Rebuild Ukraine conference in Toronto. And there were over 500 companies participating in the conference, Canadian companies. Few of them have already announced that they are opening their representative office in Ukraine to participate in Ukraine's rebuilding. And of course, laying the ground, more institutional ground for protecting their investments, for expanding the trade agreement over the digital trade, for technology and for the other sectors. That will support also many of those Canadian companies who are interested in rebuilding Ukraine.
So, and I want to talk about kind of what that free trade deal enables and encourages, and certainly how the rebuilding of Ukraine factors into that. But I just want to make sure that I understand, because my understanding of the text is that it certainly does point out sorry, I want to read the exact phrase. It says, both sides are expected to, quote unquote, promote carbon pricing and measures to mitigate carbon leakage risks. Do you take that, like, how do you interpret that? Because the Conservatives are saying it's imposing a carbon tax basically on Ukraine.
There are the agreement itself has a broad reading on these instruments. And what is core to Ukraine is also our trade agreement in Canada. And in parallel, as you know, Ukraine is looking forward to the negotiations for EU membership. So a lot of our policies in Ukraine will be built in line with the EU regulation that has different instruments on how to deal with the carbon footprint. That includes many of the options. So there is no specific way that each and every European country and in EU Commission in general have in their legislation. So for us, there's still a negotiation in process, both with our European partners and as we will work for the implementation of our free trade agreement with Canada.
So what do you say in response to Conservatives who voted against this free trade agreement because of that reason?
I think we respect the difference in mind with the different political parties in Canada. And in the same point, we really value this united support for Ukraine. Because if we look on all of the important files, whether it's the military support, whether it's the humanitarian support for Ukraine, where it's a political support, and we had quite an extensive discussion on the justice mechanism, we see the cross-party support of Ukraine, and we really value this. Also, I would say that there are definitely the areas where we would like to expand our cooperation, whether it's the energy cooperation, whether it's more building the bridges between our defense sectors and also some joint ventures to help Ukraine to be more sustainable in the weapon production with the Canadian companies, whether it's as I mentioned, the many projects that have been discussed during this conference. So we see the agreement as an important part of building this cooperation and a win-win for our bilateral economic relations.
Do you, I guess, reject the reason that they have voted against the deal, though? Because that's what I'm trying to get at, right? I see what you're saying. You have negotiations going on with the European Union, for example, where mitigating the effects of climate change is important in their trade agreements. It seems also to be important on your side of things. Are you disappointed? That they didn't vote in favor of it? Have you spoken to anyone on the on that side?
We had an extensive discussions with the members of different parties regarding this agreement. We also understand that there are some difference between the parties' approach on how to deal with the climate policy. But I think what we need to put in the core of our discussions, to be frank, that's how we can all together join the efforts to support Ukraine, both winning the war and also living through this hard winter. Because Vassy, we are expecting the horrific missile attacks. Russia is now, what we understand, trying to accumulate more missiles to launch as a year ago. The missile attack on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, probably the same strategy that we're doing last year. So I think, this discussion is going on in Canada, but I really encourage to focus on the needs what Ukraine has now. And as we had the Ramstein meeting today, and I was stressed one more time that the military support and the speed of the military support for Ukraine is important because the war is going on now. And this is kind of unfortunately, our people are dying now. And this, I think, the core focus that we are trying to engage with all of the stakeholders here in Canada and see how we can facilitate this support.
What is your sense of the level of that support and the nature of it? And by that I mean, you mentioned cross-party support. Today, the Liberals were accusing the Conservatives of essentially importing the politics of the far right in the United States, where we know support for Ukraine is waning among the extreme right in the United States, right? There's a very tense political debate that's taking place there at a very important time for Ukraine. Are you worried at all about that happening here? Do you have any sense that that will be the case?
I think I would quote here the speech of President Zelensky, where he said in the parliament that it's like the feeling of Ukraine that Canada was always on the right side of the history. And if it comes now for supporting Ukraine as we are fighting for our people, for our country, Canada, which is among those of our all the partners, the country who knows Ukraine probably best, who feels Ukraine best. We have so close people ties. Canada was the first country to recognize Ukraine's independence, and Canadians know how important it is to fight for the freedom, but also what's this about the peace, stability, and what is the core which is now on the edge of this war. And the core is whether we all together will continue to live in the world which is ruled by the law, or we will turn out the world which will be full of many crises. So I think, and we do believe that the support of Ukraine, the united support of Ukraine, will maintain.
So you're not worried about the kinds of things happening in the U.S. happening here, to be clear?
We do hope that it will not happen.
And just before I let you go, Ambassador, I did want to ask about what you mentioned around the needs right now in Ukraine and the anticipation of the nature of the attack from Russia. I have listened to President Zelensky in some other interviews talk about how what's unfolding in the Middle East is taking up a lot of space, understandably, of course, because of the nature of what's happening there. Are you concerned about that impacting the level of support across Western allies for Ukraine, or a lack of attention on the needs as acute as they are, as you describe them?
Of course, we see that a lot of attention is now on the Middle East. But in the same time, as we see the additional packages of support that were just announced within the last week, including the big support from Germany, providing us with additional air defense to be prepared for another Russian attacks. And so the country is stepping in, understanding, what are those needs. I think that's for us important. And of course, we are counting also on the support in US, because that will be very important in terms of both the military support and financial support to Ukraine. And yes, that's the media attention. Probably Ukraine is not always on the front page, but that's also kind of a thing that Russia is fighting the war. Every day our people are dying on the front line. And for many people and for many governments, and for example, as we are talking on the security guarantees for Ukraine, that is building more kind of a sustainable approach to support Ukraine and sustainable approach to build it on a level not only responding to another crisis or another breaking news on the media, but building the support of Ukraine on more kind of a strategic way. So we are looking forward, as we started the negotiations with Canada on our security guarantees or assurance, we are looking forward to continue this dialogue and to have this agreement in place together with the other G7 countries and even more who joined the approach. So that will be also longer-term approach and the approach that will cover many areas to help us to win this war.
Ambassador, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate you making the time for the conversation. Thank you so much.